it's right back there. I need a battery in the, you know where they kept back there, don't you? I could tell the sound was off and it may be back on now, but the red light is on. It's, needs a battery change. Okay. It'd be better if I could leave it on and just bring you a battery, please. I don't have to do a harness to get it. What I was just about to do here, I was going to have to have the volume on to hear the pitch, but I'm going to silence it so we don't get those telemarketers, those pesky telemarketers calling. Thank you, brother. I do appreciate it very much. There you go. We're back in business. You know, the thing is that hardly ever happens because Keith Isbell changes it out so regularly. However, a week like this puts a special drain on the battery because we're using it a lot more than usual. So that's not a problem. Wish everything was that easy to fix, don't you? Okay, there you go. So what we've been doing in the auditorium class here, we've been, and I say this for the benefit of new ones, we've had some visitors each day that haven't been able to make it to the other times, but we follow the same subject matter in all the classes. It's broken down to the various age levels. The theme, or the lesson title, I should say, for today, the theme of the week is Gems from the Proverbs. And I think it's a great study for any age, and as you've heard me say already several times this week, it's especially apparent as you carefully read the Proverbs that Solomon is wanting to capture young people's attention so they give their hearts to the Lord while they're young. And so a special appeal is made throughout to the younger person, the kind of person he should be, what he should be attracted to, what he can value as being a real treasure or that which he should avoid. So today the specific lesson title is Living God's Way. And back in 2012, we did this same theme. At that time, we purchased material. I think it was from Lambert Publishing Company. And so we've still, as we've modified that and have done our own material this year, we're still kind of following the same suggested titles as well as many of the passages, but again, redoing that and making that for our own use. So one of the topics, when you look at living God's way, I mean, how broad is that? What does that cover? Well, you can say, well, that's kind of the whole Bible, is to reveal God's will. So, of course, what you do when you have a title like that is then you have to zero in on, just select certain aspects that will be emphasized in a given lesson and do some others in other lessons. So what is suggested in that category that we'll be looking at, that's very important. One thing is how we treat other people. If we're going to live God's way, it matters how we interact with other people. And again, being in a class situation as we are, I've been all week long, I've been calling on the class members individually to read passages. And some have volunteered, some have been volunteered. It works well both ways. And again, if you have a comment or a question, it is a class situation, so feel free. Bill, I'm having a hard time getting used to you sitting over there. Have you ever done that before? You know you're really throwing me a curve, don't you? I mean, I can deal with it. I can deal with all kinds of distracting situations. and still go ahead, but I just, well, I appreciate that. Okay, so let's do some reading. I've done this section too. Have I looked at all three sections? I know what. Let's start in the back. I haven't done that yet. So, Andy, let's start in the back and we'll work forward a little bit. And my first one I want to look at is chapter 3, verse 27. I know that at least some of the classes, I'd asked Brother Reese what were his memory verses, and this is a verse that his group, 5th and 6th graders, will memorize, Proverbs 3:27. That's a good starting verse. Andy, read it for us.
Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in the power of your hand to do so.
You know, that's really a great passage. It may be the kind of thing that, for example, we would consider Galatians 6 and verse 10. Randy, read Galatians 6, verse 10, and let's see how that might relate to the text that Andy just read.
So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially to those who are of the household of faith.
Okay, so as we have opportunity, let's do that which is good to all men. Then he says, especially to those of the household of faith. Well, all men means all men. Now, I'm not likely to have opportunity to do good today to someone who is on the other side of the world. But those that come in my pathway, those within my sphere of influence. So when it says all men, you know, there's 7 billion people on the planet. But the point of it is all men, as you have opportunity. You think of the story Jesus told that we end up calling the parable of the Good Samaritan. You have to realize in the days of Jesus, nobody talked about Good Samaritans. But the point of it is that the one that helped, he was traveling on that road that goes from Jericho to Jerusalem, and he came upon that man that had a need, and so he helped him. There was an opportunity there. It may also be in biblical times if you were employing someone, and especially the people that work for daily wages. They were really dependent upon you being fair and having integrity, so that at the end of the day you wouldn't say, well, I'll tell you what, you know, it's kind of late, let's just catch up on all this tomorrow. No, don't withhold good from those to whom it is due. They've worked, they've earned. You have the agreement that at the end of the day you're to settle up with them. That's the time you're to do that. So for people with their vineyards and flocks and daily workers, you remember Jesus talked about the parable of those that were hired right up to the 11th hour, and remember they agreed upon a denarius per day. In New Testament times, that was the working wage of a daily worker. It was 1 denarius per day. So you've agreed upon that. It's the end of the day. You settle up. But as I say, Galatians 6, verse 10 would seem to also shed some light on that as we have opportunity. So as you live God's way, you have that openness. You have the opportunity to do good. Then do that. And by the way, some of you, I know Brother Pender's mentioned this from time to time, it always does my heart good when somebody remembers a sermon that I preached. And there's one I preached some time back that was called When Helping Hurts. Remember that? When Helping Hurts. And the caveat about a passage like this is that when you are enabling somebody to continue bad behavior, you're not helping them. You're not doing them good. And so you have to realize that. I mean, some people are very indiscriminate in terms of, well, we want to help everybody. Well, what does 2 Thessalonians 3 say about that? If a man will not work, how does that go? Neither let him eat. So Scripture interprets Scripture. Would you agree? Well, let's do some more in the Proverbs here. It's just treating others right as our first point about living God's way. That's not the only point. It's just one point. In the same third chapter of Proverbs, we look at verse 29. And Laura, would you like to read that for me?
Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you.
What translation are you reading from? NIV?
Yes.
ESV. Okay. Good. That's a good translation. Does anybody happen to have the NIV? All right, pull that one up for me. King James here, of course, is what I pretty well followed on our screen. Do not devise evil against your neighbor, for he dwells by you for safety's sake. Have you pulled it up yet? 329 in the NIV.
Do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you.
All right, trustfully. I think, Laura, did yours use the word trustfully, or how did that put it?
Said, do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly.
Yeah. So wanted to point that out. The concept of he dwells for you for safety's sake. I can see that. There are a lot of folks that just feel better if there's a house near their house, that they could even see that house, and just, not that you're going to be in the house all the time, but just to know there's someone there. If there was a need, you've got a neighbor there. But other translations are bringing out the trust element as well, and that's why I wanted to make a notation of that. Now, also, while we're in chapter 3, there really turns out to be 3 verses that we're selecting on treating others right. And Deborah, would you like to read that one, 3 and verse 30?
Don't accuse anyone without cause when he has done you no harm.
Okay. So we're not looking for trouble, and there are some people that we know they're just ready to pick a fight. They have a contentious attitude, and this is saying don't be like that. Don't be like that. If there's an occasion that you need to deal with something, that's another matter. But don't be of that kind of disposition. By the way, before I go on to the next slide, I really like that latter part of up at the top passage, 327. That expression up here when it says, when it is in the power of your hand to do so. There's a series of lessons that I have done in the past. I think, just going by memory, I think it's 5 lessons, at least 4, if not 5. And I just talk about what is within your power. And I base it, my springboard passage is over in Acts chapter 5, when Ananias and Sapphira conspired together to lie to the Holy Spirit about the gift that they were giving. They said they gave it all when they withheld part of the price. And as Peter rebuked them about that and talked to, first Ananias separately, then later, of course, his wife comes in not knowing what had happened. They both died that day. But when Peter's asking, why did you do this? He said, when you retained the land, when you had it, was it not your own? Was it not in your own power? When you sold it, in other words, you could give part of it, all of it. It was within your own power. And a lot of people worry about what is not within their own power, and the thing that is within their own power, they don't pay attention to. If there's threat of a tornado, we can do what we can do. We can go to the basement, we can go to a shelter, but I really can't stop tornadoes from coming through this part of North Alabama. It's not called Tornado Alley for nothing. If you live in the state, there's going to be some tornadoes. It's not in my power to stop them. So what if I just worry and fret about the next time a tornado is going to come? Is that doing anybody any good? And if you have any money in the stock markets, you can invest. If you have some money to invest, you can invest, or you can choose not to invest. But is it within your power? I mean, is it up to you if the stocks are going to go up or down? I mean, you can choose if you want to invest that way, but we have very little control about what happens like that. And people talk about what they would do for the Lord if they had $1 million. Kind of reminds me of back in the day when people raised hogs. And a fellow was talking about, we would help you, preacher. He was doing a meeting, but, times are just so lean. But if I had more money, if I had $100, whatever, I'd give 10 of it to the Lord. And he said, well, what about, let's see, your hog just had a litter of pigs, 10 pigs. How about taking one of those and selling that and giving that to the Lord? He said, that's not fair. You know I've got 10 pigs. But that would have been within his power. He could have taken one and sold it and given that to the Lord. But anyway, think about that. There are things that you can do within your sphere of influence. You can't always fix other people. There's somebody you really care about and they're having a marriage problem, and you can counsel, you can encourage, you can pray. But it's not within your power to do the things that somebody else has to do. I think that's one reason Solomon said that which is crooked cannot be made straight. We need to focus on what's within our power. We can waste a lot of time worrying and grieving about things that are not within our power, something that we can't do anything about. That sort of thing you pray about. You cast your burdens to the Lord and you leave it in His hands. That's all I know to do with that. Anyway, think about that. But there's some other passages. And again, we're using the Proverbs as a springboard, but I want to look at a couple of New Testament passages now with you. Now we turn to the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew. And let's go to the 5th chapter. Sister Judy, would you like to read this one? This is Matthew 5 and verse 23 and 25. Okay, so the language here is clothed within the framework of the Old Testament economy. We understand that the law of Moses, as we have taught on many other occasions, is operative until the death of Christ on the cross. So here the example he's using to people that were still under the law of the need to be reconciled with your brother involves going to the temple while the temple's still standing, and you're bringing the gift to the altar, and as you're about to follow through with that, you remember that there's something that your brother has against you. Now, in a minute I want to look at Matthew 18, and that's where you have something against your brother, because it's your brother that has sinned against you in another passage. But in this case, apparently there's something legitimately that he has against you. It may well be that from the standpoint of this passage, if you're not totally the offending party, you're at least partly responsible because you need to take the initiative. So you just leave the gift, go be reconciled with your brother. And then when that's taken care of, then come back and then offer your gift. And so this is just saying it should have a priority. If there is a rift between you and your brother, you go. If he has something against you, you go and make that right. That's what it's saying. It's important to do that. Now, likewise, coming up in Matthew 18, verse 15, this is when your brother has something against you. He has sinned. He has clearly sinned. By the way, it's not something you don't like. It's not your personal preference. He's sinned. So you go to him and you show him his fault between you and him alone. Are you with me? If he hear you, you have what? What does it say? You have gained your brother. And that's the objective. You're wanting to gain your brother. You're wanting to reconcile. Now, that's not the way a lot of people handle it. Have you ever noticed how social media is misused? I mean, it's misused for everything. That'd be another lesson. But it's really misused by Christians. When someone has, in their way of thinking, this brother or sister has sinned against them, and they'll just tell the world. They'll just take it to a public forum and just say all manner of things and just spew and ventilate, and maybe it makes them feel better, but that does a lot of harm, and it violates this passage. It doesn't say go public with it. It doesn't say tell other people. Go show him his fault between you and him alone. And again, if he hear you, you've gained your, and that's the thing you should want, to gain your brother. And when you put these two passages together, it's saying in Matthew 5, if your brother has aught against you, you take the initiative. Again, you may be involved. He has something against you because you have done something you should not do. Then you go make that right. On the other hand, in Matthew 18, he sinned against you. You've not sinned against him, but you still go to him and make it right. So the point of it is, you go either way. If you're at fault or you're not at fault. Jesus is saying, you go and try to work that thing out. A lot of times people say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. It's up to him to come to me. You ever heard anybody act like that? I'm not going to him. I didn't do anything wrong. But see, either way, Jesus is saying, go to that person and try to resolve that. There's a principle here. Who's my next reader? Romans 12 and verse 18. Romans 12 and verse 18. Sister Guthrie, would you like to read that one for me? Okay, we'll give you time to find that. Romans 12 and verse 18. Well, okay. You know, when you're looking for it, sometimes it's a little hard to find it, isn't it? Teresa, do you have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it is possible, as much as depends on you, let fix please with all.
Okay. As much as possible. So I suppose that leaves room when you've tried everything you can. There's some people, they still won't have it that way. But as much as in you lieth, live peaceably with all men. Talking about sometimes finding a passage, I think I shared with you my good friend Raymond Harville. I was doing a call-in radio program up in Lexington, Alabama, that really, it was on an AM station. It reached all the way down here. Brother Fanning was a regular listener to that thing. But anyway, one day, Raymond was filling in for me. I was usually one that took the call and made preliminary comments, and Raymond and I then would go back and forth as we discussed that with the caller. But this time, he was sitting where I usually did, and because I was away. So he was filling in. He's telling me later what happened. He said, somebody called with a question on Job. And so he has to take the call. You know, you're doing like this, and also like this because you control the volume as well, so you're talking on the phone. And then you're reaching for your Bible and you're trying to find the passage, and you got a pen over here. So a lot of things are going on that you don't see when you're listening to the radio. So anyway, the question was on Job. And so he's talking to the fellow, and he goes, and he passed it. So he said he starts the other way, and he's talking to the fellow trying to answer the question, and he passed it again. He said, I never did find the book of Job. The whole time he was trying to answer the question. And I mean, you might know the Bible like the back of your hand, but there are times you're trying to find the reference quickly. And Adam McCluskey last night was looking for a passage in Hebrews. Well, he knows where it is, but that's just going to happen. Anyway. Are we good so far? Treating others right. Now then, there's something else the Bible in the Proverbs talks about living God's way, and that is the work ethic. And I'll tell you something that Solomon has no use for, and that is the sluggard. The sluggard is featured a lot in here. So let's see what we got. Brother Ken, would you like to read for me? We're looking first at Proverbs 6, and if you will, read verse 6 through 11, please.
Proverbs 6, 6 through 11. Take a lesson from the ants and the lazybones. Learn from their ways and be wise. Even though they have no prince, governor, or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. But you, lazy bones, how long will you sleep? And when will you wake up? I want you to learn this lesson. A little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of your hands just to rest. And poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. Circe, you attack you like an armed robber.
Okay. What are you reading from there, Ken?
That's the new life.
Okay. All right. Puts it in modern English there. Has anybody not seen ants at work? Of course, most of the time I'm seeing ants, I'm not admiring them. You know, if they're in my yard making ant hills, I'm not very fond of them. But so they can be a nuisance. But, you know, you get past that and see the point Solomon is making. Look at how they dig their complex home. Look at how they provide for food. Look at how they're moving and moving things way more than they do. And it's not like there's a big ant that's in charge, you know, and a boss and a prince. And here he's telling the sluggard, Ken, did that say lazy bones? He's telling lazy bones, you know, you can learn a lesson from the ant. And so a lot of passages, and that are, well, let's look at 10 and verse 4, because I've got other things I want to look at besides the sluggard. But, okay, would you read for me, please, 10 and verse 4.
He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich.
Okay, and read also, if you will, another related one. 13:4 is quite similar to that one, if you will, please.
The soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat.
Now, Proverbs are ruling principles. That's what the word means, a ruling principle. And we know that a person could have a good work ethic and have a combination of things to transpire that would cause some financial reversals, where a good person would be in need of help. We understand that, and this is why in the New Testament often reference will be made to the collection for the needy saints. There could be a famine that impacts an entire country, and again, you read about that in the Bible. But what this is saying is, all things being equal, as you look here at verses like 13:4, the soul of the sluggard desires and has nothing, the soul of the diligent shall be made rich. The contrast is, it may not be the most glamorous job in the world, but if you have an honorable occupation and you stay with it and you work hard at it, you're going to have something to show for it. And what God blesses you with, you try to manage it well and be a good steward, you're going to be the end up, little by little, to have something to show for it, but the sluggard is not. He'll talk about his plans and what he's wanting to do, and it's just talk and excuses. 1924 is my next one. Stan, I think you're next up, aren't you?
A lazy man buries his hand in his bow, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth.
Now, the thing is, I like a knife and a fork, and if I need it, a spoon, a napkin. I mean, Linda sets our table, and she does all that. If you go somewhere else to eat, you kind of expect those things. In biblical times, that wasn't always the case. In fact, just recently, time before last, Brother Jenkins and I made a trip. We went to some places you can't take a group, and we went to Hebron with a fellow that worked some with the United Nations, and he could just take us where we needed to go safely. But anyway, because we were making a day of it, and this fellow had worked in Hebron for a couple of years prior to his present location, I said, hey, do you know a place that we can get something to eat that would be good and not take too long? He said, yeah, I know just the place. So he pulls the car in. He has his own car. Brother Jenkins and I have secured him for the day. He pulls it in to the side there in Hebron. And probably everybody in here would just pass that up, if you were looking for a place to eat. And it was, it's hard for me to tell you how small it was. I mean, like from here to the wall, and the rest of them, they're kind of hanging outside on the sidewalk. And so we tell them what we want, and they bring this skillet about this big and put it on the table. And it has grilled lamb and beef and chicken and all manner of vegetables. It's all grilled, and bread that's the size of a pizza, that's out of those fired ovens. I hope I'm not making you too hungry. Oh, the bread was delicious. But anyway, so bring the bread, and it's hot. You could make a meal just off the bread. And so this guy that said that's a good place, he just starts breaking. And this is for all three of us. No forks, no spoons. So you take the bread and just dip in there and get something with it and eat that bread. And it was good. And when we got through, there was nothing left there. But it's just, you don't eat that way every day. And there are still cultures where people put their hand in the bowl. Now, Nancy would probably starve before she would do that. I have a friend that's from Lebanon, and he was talking about looking at an old family get-together film, and they had done that with and I forget, is it Lebanon or is he Palestinian or Lebanese? Palestinian. Anyway, and so they have this dish with rice and meat, and everybody's just, doing their hands in it. So, now, Brother Pender, I'm just doing what you say I need to do for us to understand what it's talking about. Because we don't put our hand in a dish to start with, that'd be bad manners. But in the biblical world, that'd be often the way that people would share a meal. But the point is, here's somebody such a lazy bones. His hand gets in the bowl, and he's just too lazy to bring the food back to his mouth and eat. I mean, that's how, as we say down south, that's just how sorry he is. That's the point. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make the offer to share the slides with you for those that would like to, because see what I'm talking about? There's so many about the sluggard. There's a lion in the street, and then there's the contrast. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. But it's just a matter of time management that I have to pass over that. But as I say, I make available a printout of the slides to anybody that would like them. And I've had several requests, and we'll get those done. So you'll get to have what we put on the screen if you want that. And I'm having to pass over some of it. So related passages here in the New Testament. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor with his hands the thing that is good, that he may have to give to him that hath need. And we've already referenced a while ago, you helped me remember a while ago in 2 Thessalonians 3, 10, and 11, that if any will not work, neither let him eat. In fact, in that passage, that is dealing with why someone should be withdrawn from. Because he's walking disorderly. And that's specifically what was going on with some of them there. But we got to move on, because Daryl's going to ring the bell, and if I'm through or not, in how many more minutes? See? He's counting. All right, so now it's 11:02, right? So that leads me, we're talking about living God's way. And what have we said? Treating other people right, number one. Secondly, we mentioned the work ethic. And more and more you got people that think the government owes them a living, somebody else owes them a living. Some people think the church owes them a living. And I'm not talking about those that are laboring in the Lord's work. But they just, it's just amazing, some attitudes. But the third thing I want to talk about, though, living God's way, is choosing companions. You know, the Bible in the book of Proverbs talks a lot about companionship. Glenda, would you like to read for me in chapter, what's my first one? 17, please.
A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born like adversity.
That's a good one, isn't it? Now, while you're there at that opening, Glenda, read 18:24 for me, please.
A man of many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother.
All right? That's really the latter part of that I'm interested in, a friend who sticks closer than a brother. A friend loves at all times. So these are great passages. And I remember, I've mentioned before, I studied the Proverbs under Homer Haley. He was a wonderful teacher of everything. He was a great teacher of Proverbs. And I remember him saying that as you go through life, you may have many acquaintances. You will have few truly good friends. Well, I'd like to think that actually I have many good friends. But I still understand what this passage says, the very special relationship, that kindred spirit, that Paul-Timothy relationship, the friend that sticks closer than a brother, that is special. 27 verse 9. Would you, next door to Glenda, would you read that one for me, please? Yeah. 27:9. Okay. And this isn't a friend that just tells you what you want to hear. It's not someone who is a yes man. But the point of it is that a friend is someone who can be a source of good counsel. I think of the David-Jonathan relationship. You remember how it says Jonathan strengthened his hand in the Lord? That's the kind of friendship and counsel that I'm talking about. Well, I'm going to have to pass over some things here quickly, except, again, give these to you as a suggestive way, but related to that, we've kind of given the positive verses. But there are some people you do not want as friends that the Proverbs also talk about. The Proverbs talks about gossips, those that are short-tempered, and it says don't be with them because you'll be like them. Those given to drinking and gluttony, and those given to change. Someone that's always interested in novelty, the latest fad. A lot of people are like that today. Liars, those untrustworthy, those inconsiderate, and the warning about associating with those given to violence is in chapter 1. I apologize for having to cover so much so quickly. Again, it's suggestive, it's not exhaustive. And all you have to do is ask, and I will supply you a printout copy, and you'll have it that way. One more category I want to mention. Living God's way, God has some things to say about happiness. And let's do read 12:25 to get us started here. Bill?
Anxiety is a man's ways it down. A good heart, a good world makes us right.
Okay. And you've got a couple references in chapter 14. If you drop down to verse 30, a sound life A sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. And 15:13, a merry heart makes a cheerful countenance. By sorrow of heart the spirit is broken. And that's similar also in 17 and verse 22. So you've got a lot of verses like that. But the point of this happiness is it's not just being happy. As Isaiah 26:3 says, you will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. The New Living Translation, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all those whose thoughts are fixed on you. So the Proverbs also tell us in chapter 13, verse 15, the way of the transgressor is hard. And so it works both ways. Cain, why is your countenance fallen? God asked. If you do well, shall it not be lifted up? God is saying, Cain, if you want to feel right, you need to do right. Of course, Cain disregarded that, went up and killed his brother and made things worse. But happiness in the Bible comes from doing right, from being in right relationship with God. And any other way is futile. Well, in the last couple of minutes that we have, I did want to share with you just a little bit about Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Because when you look at all these examples about living God's way, as I was telling the boys and girls a while ago, the perfect example of that is Jesus. That in every way, he came to do the Father's will. John 8:29, I always do the things that are pleasing in his sight. So consistent obedience. I want to show you, again, like I was showing a while ago, I don't know how many photos of sheep and shepherds I have in the biblical world, but all over biblical sites. I've got photos I've taken at Mount Ararat, just everywhere, Turkey as well as Israel. And this is a sheepfold. I photographed these sheep as they had been taken there into the fold. This is at Miletus, where Paul met with the Ephesian elders. There was a shepherd with some sheep there. And I photographed this one in Alexandria of Egypt. This, of course, is a statue, and it's nearly 2,000 years old. It goes back to Roman/Byzantine times, and it's depicting Jesus as the Good Shepherd, telling, when you think in terms of Luke 15, the shepherd going for the sheep that is lost, leaving those that were safe to go pursue the one that was lost. So that's our lesson for today. The Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Jesus cares about the sheep. And again, the shepherd of Luke 15 left the 99 and went after the sheep that was lost, found it, and was rejoicing.